Blessed be the Lord Emperor Haile Selassie the first, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Emperor of Ethiopia. His Majesty is God. Let His name be praised. Today we're going to talk about the Sabbath. What is the Sabbath? What does the Sabbath mean, and why is the Sabbath so important? So the seventh day. The seventh day, if we look at Exodus 20, when it talks about the commandments, it tells us to remember the seventh day. In Exodus chapter 20, verse 7 to 11, it says, "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord your God in vain." It says, "For the Lord will not hold him guiltless that takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son nor your daughter, nor your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the seventh day and hallowed it." So we must ask ourselves, what does this mean, and what is the significance of the seventh day, and why is it so important for it to be kept holy as God is holy? And what does this mean for us to keep the seventh day, to remember the seventh day? So most people, when they think about the seventh day, they're gonna look at their calendar and count the days. But the question is does Saturday save you? Does Sunday save you? Does a calendar day save you? The meaning of the seventh day is much more than just the calendar day. The meaning of the seventh day, what it's asking you to remember, is God. To remember God. And that you remembering God and acknowledging God is the seventh day. In Leviticus chapter 11, in Leviticus 11 verse 44 through 45, it says, "For I am the Lord your God." Remember in Exodus 20 verse 1, it says, "I am the Lord." This is the significance that it is bringing your attention to. It's bringing your attention to God. Accepting God is what the seventh day is telling us to do. It says, "For I am the Lord your God." It says, "You shall therefore sanctify yourselves, and you shall be holy, for I am holy." So it's saying for us to be as God is, to be holy as He is holy. Remembering the seventh day. Remembering God. Accepting God. It says, "Neither shall you defile yourselves with any manner of creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. You shall not defile yourself with a false god, with a false philosophy. You shall be holy as God is holy," meaning that you shall worship and follow the true God. That is keeping the seventh day holy. It says, "For I am the Lord. For I am the Lord that brings you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall be therefore holy as I am holy." Right? He brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, out of mental darkness. And for Him to be our God, for us to know that He's God. For the seventh day, what it's asking us to remember is to remember God. So again, we must ask ourselves, who is God? Because when you know who God is, that is when you're going to be keeping the seventh day holy. So let's go to Genesis. Genesis chapter 2. In Genesis 2 verse 2 and 3, it says, "And on the seventh day God ended His work which He had made, and He rested on the seventh day from all His work which He had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it He had rested from all His work which God created and made." So now, God rested, blessed, and sanctified the seventh day. So again, the meaning of this, the rest is not a physical rest where God took a day off. And the rest is not for us on the seventh day to do nothing. That sanctification that God is calling us to remember, that God is asking us to acknowledge that seventh day. It explains specifically what that sanctification is in Ezekiel 38. In Ezekiel 38 verse 23, it says, thus will I magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations, and they shall know that I am the Lord. So that again, when it says in Genesis 2 that God sanctified the seventh day, what is the significance of that? It says that God will sanctify himself. That is what we must remember. We must remember the day when it says God will magnify himself and sanctify himself, and when he will be known in the eyes of many nations, and we shall know that he is the Lord. For God brought us out of the house of Egypt, and he shall be our God. Meaning, he brought us out of mental darkness, out of the house of bondage, out of mental darkness, because God is not invisible. It says that he will be known in the eyes of many nations. So we must know who the Bible is talking about. When you know who God is, and when you acknowledge him, submit to him, accept him, that is when you're keeping the seventh day holy. For Emperor Haile Selassie I is the Almighty. And when he was crowned King of Kings and Lord of Lords on November the 2nd, 1930, that is the seventh day. November the 2nd, 1930 is the day that is asking you to remember. That is the seventh day. That is the sanctification. So when it says, be holy as he is holy, when the Bible says that God is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, when it says that he is the first and the last, we must accept that. That is the holiness. That is being holy, is when we accept the word of God. When you accept that, then you're holy as he is holy. But if you make up your own interpretation and say, well, Haile Selassie has these titles, but I don't want to acknowledge him, then you're not holy as God is holy, because you're not accepting God. You're not accepting his message. So it says in Zechariah 14 verse 9, it says, and the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day shall there be one Lord, and his name one. And that day is the seventh day. That is the day that is asking you to remember. His name is one. Emperor Haile Selassie I, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. If we search through our history, we will find that he's the only one with those titles. So if we just want to make up a myth and say that, I'm waiting for somebody else, or somebody else has these titles, then you're not accepting the reality. And you're not remembering that day. That day when God magnified himself. That day when there's one Lord and his name one. Haile Selassie I. That day when the King of Kings and Lord of Lords established his kingdom. November the 2nd, 1930. That is what is asking you to remember. And that is the holiness of the Lord. Let's go back to Leviticus. In Leviticus chapter 20, Leviticus 20 verse 7, it says, sanctify yourselves, therefore, and be ye holy, for I am the Lord your God. It said to accept God. Accept him. Be holy, for he is God. Haile Selassie I. That is the seventh day that you must remember. To sanctify yourself means that you accept God, because God sanctified himself. For you to sanctify yourself means that you accept him. God is holy. For you to be holy means that you accept him. God blessed the seventh day. For you to receive those blessings means you accept him. It is through your faith that you're justified. Faith is the sanctification, the blessings. It comes through faith. You accepting God. It says, for he is God. Haile Selassie I. You must know who God is. Just saying, I accept God means nothing unless you know who that is. You must know who God is. And knowing who God is, when you know who God is, then you're keeping the seventh day holy. It has nothing to do with a calendar day. Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday does not save anybody. So now, let's go to Mark. Let's go to Mark chapter 2. And in Mark chapter 2, verse 27 to 28, it says, Christ said unto them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath. So the Sabbath was made for man, meaning that sign, the seventh day, the coronation, November the 2nd, 1930, that day that God magnified and sanctified himself, because God sanctified the seventh day, that day was made for man. That day, the Sabbath was made for man. It was made for you to observe, for you to acknowledge that day, for you to acknowledge God, for you to accept God. That was made for man. That was given to us for us to accept. And the commandments tell you to remember that day and to accept God. For he's the one who brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, meaning out of mental darkness. If you don't know that Haile Selassie is God, then you don't know who God is. So the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Not for man, not for mankind to try to interpretate things in their own way and to deny God. To deny that Haile Selassie is God. To make up their own theories about God, that God is invisible. Even though Ezekiel 38:23 says that he will magnify himself in front of all of the nations. That he will sanctify himself. Even though Ezekiel 14 verse 9 says that the Lord shall be king over all the earth. So he can't be invisible if he's king over all the earth and he's shown his face to all of the worlds. Right? So not man for the Sabbath, meaning it's not for man to interpretate things their own way. So when it says be holy as God is holy, what that is saying is to accept God and accept his principles. Then you're holy as he is holy, made in his image. Means accepting him and following God's message, not your own message. People can think of all kinds of different theories to try to explain things. But unless your theory falls in line with what God has said, then your theory is not right. So when it says not man for the Sabbath, meaning it's not for man to interpretate things in whatever way they want to do it. You must interpretate it in the way that God has set it up, right? Because the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Let's go to Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 4. In Hebrews chapter 4, we can go from verse 1. It says, let us therefore fear, lest the promise being left of us, any of you entering into his rest, any of you should seem to come short of it. For unto us was the gospel preached as well as unto them. But the word preached did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. Right? So again, it's saying enter into his rest. Enter into his rest. It says, for the gospel was preached, but it didn't profit them because they did not believe it. So what did they do? They didn't enter into his rest. Because entering into that rest is not a day off. His rest is his faith, accepting him. So when you enter into his rest, meaning that you accept the word. But there are some who the gospel was preached unto, but it didn't profit them any because they didn't mix it with faith, meaning they didn't believe the sign. They didn't believe in the Sabbath, November the 2nd, 1930. They didn't believe that Emperor Haile Selassie I is God. But that's what it's calling you to remember. It's calling you to remember God. The day that God blessed and sanctified himself in front of the eyes of all of the nations. He blessed the seventh day. That day when he's shown his face unto the world is the seventh day. It has nothing to do with the calendar. So now it says, for we which have believed do enter into the rest. You see, so it's not talking about the physical rest. It's talking about those who believe. If you believe, then you enter into that rest, meaning that you accept God. We believe in the sign. We accept the sign, November the 2nd, 1930. It says, as he said, as I have sworn in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest, although the works was finished from the foundation of the world. So the works was finished on November the 2nd, 1930, when His Majesty was crowned King of Kings and Lord of Lords. There's nothing more to see. Everything is done, right? But in order for us to enter into that rest, it says that you must believe in Him. So again, it says, for He spoke in a certain day of the 7th day on this wise. And God did rest the 7th day from all His works. And in this place again, if they shall enter into my rest. So God did rest the 7th day. God did magnify and sanctify Himself in that day, the 7th day. There shall be one Lord and His name one, Haile Selassie the first. So if they shall enter into my rest, if they shall believe in Him, then you as well shall enter into the rest if you believe in Him. Right? It says, seeing therefore it remains that some must enter therein, and they to whom it was first preached entered not in because of unbelief. They entered not into the rest because of unbelief. So this rest, this 7th day, this sanctification is talking about faith. They entered not in because of unbelief. We enter in through belief. Right? So it's talking about believing in God, accepting God. That is the 7th day. It says again, He limits a certain day, saying to David, today, after so long a time, as it is said, today if you will hear His voice, harden not your heart. Now the Bible is the word of God. If you hear His voice, meaning accepting the message of the Bible, because the Bible says that God is the first and the last, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So when you see that sign, when we see His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I bearing these titles, then we know that He's the one. There is no other. It didn't say that God will give His glory to another. So it says that when you see these things come to pass, it is Him. Accepting Him and believing in Him is keeping the 7th day holy, following Him, accepting God. That is what it's telling you to remember. That is the sanctification, the holiness that the Bible is asking you to commit yourself to. Believing in God. Those are the commandments. It says, for if Jesus had given them rest, then would He not afterward have spoken of another day? For the rest again, if we enter into that rest, that is through our faith, if we believe. And if we don't believe, then we do not enter into that rest. So if Jesus had given us rest, meaning that if we accept the message of Christ and believe in God, Emperor Haile Selassie I, then He wouldn't have spoken of another day, and He didn't. For Christ is the Son of God. He's the only one who can declare God unto us and show you God. Like it says in John 6 verse 46. Only through Christ will you see and know who God is. So the message that Emperor Haile Selassie I is God is the message of Jesus. That is the testimony of Christ, for which the world rejected. But that again is the salvation. Accepting God, Emperor Haile Selassie I. And Christ didn't speak about no other. Christ spoke about His Majesty, His Father, Emperor Haile Selassie I. It says, there remains therefore a rest to the people of God. Right? There remains a rest to the people of God, because we know who God is. It says, for he that enters into His rest, he also has ceased from his own works, as God did from His. Let us labor therefore to enter into that rest, lest any man fall after the same example of unbelief. Let us labor therefore to enter into that rest, lest any man fall after the same example of unbelief. So when it says to stop your own works, that's not talking about your day-to-day job. That's talking about your faith. Stop your own interpretation of things and accept God for who He is. Accept Him. Haile Selassie I. He's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Christ didn't speak about no other day. Christ didn't speak about no other doctrine. There's only one, the first and the last. So when you see that sign, it's saying to accept it. Remember that day. Accept that day. Be holy as He is holy. Means accept Him. Right? So that is what it is asking us to acknowledge. For you to stop doing your own works, your own interpretation of things. which does not profit anything, and which is not the message of the Bible, if you don't acknowledge the fact that Emperor Haile Selassie I is the Almighty. You must stop from those works. You must stop from that false interpretation if you want to enter into the rest of God, if you want to know who God is. Because only if you accept Haile Selassie I will you be able to see and know who God is. Because there's not going to be another. There's going to be no other King of Kings and Lord of Lords. There's only one. The Bible said that God will not give his glory unto another. So now, in Psalm 95, let's go to Psalm 95. In Psalm 95, verse 6 to 11, it says, O come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, and the sheep of his hand. Today if you will hear his voice, harden not your heart, as in the provocation, and as in the day of temptation in the wilderness, when your fathers tempted me, proved me, and saw my work. 40 years long was I grieved with this generation, and said, it is the people that do error in their heart. They have not known my ways, unto whom I swore in my wrath, that they should not enter into my rest. Right? They have not known God's ways. They tempted God. They did not believe in God. You see that? So they did not enter into his rest. It says, come, let us worship. Harden not your heart, as in the provocation, as our forefathers, these past generations, these people who don't believe in Haile Selassie. It says, let us worship God, for he is our God. He is our Maker. He is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. He is the only one. There's not going to be no other. He is the first and the last, the conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah. There's only one, and that's Haile Selassie I. So let us believe in the Sabbath. Let us accept the Sabbath. The Sabbath is God. When God magnified and sanctified himself in that day, the seventh day. This has nothing to do with the calendar. This has to do with faith. When God magnified and sanctified himself, for he sanctified the seventh day. That day is the day when God shone his face unto the world. He will be known in the eyes of many nations. So that is the day for us to acknowledge. The day that God shone his face unto us. And us entering into that rest is us accepting him. Us being holy as he is holy means us accepting him. And if you don't accept him, then you don't keep the Sabbath and you do not enter into his rest. Right? So it says in Luke 13. In Luke 13 it says from verse 10 through 17. It says, Christ again. It says, he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And behold, there was a woman that had a spirit of infirmity 18 years, and was bowed together, and could no wise lift up herself. And when Jesus saw her, he called her to him, and said unto her, Woman, thou art loosed from your infirmity. And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight, and glorified God. And the ruler of the synagogue answered with indignation, because that Jesus had healed on the Sabbath day, and said unto the people, there are 6 days in which men ought to work, and in them therefore come and be healed, and not on the Sabbath day. And Jesus then answered and said unto him, you are a hypocrite. Does not each one of you on a Sabbath loose his ox or his ass from the stall, and lead him away to watering? And ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound, lo, these 18 years be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath day? And when he had said these things, all his adversaries were ashamed, and all the people rejoiced for all the glorious things that was done by him. So what it is saying is that Christ said, you're a hypocrite if you're trying to tell me that he can't heal on the seventh day. He says, do you not let go of your ox and your ass and give them water on the seventh day? Do you not eat on the seventh day? There's always work being done on every day of the week. You can't get around that. Whether it's as simple as you turning on a light The light must go on, and you're advocating somebody's work in order for that to take place. You can't get around the fact that the seventh day work must go on. If you get sick, if your child gets sick, are you not going to take them to the doctor? Do you not want the doctor to be there for you? If somebody commits a crime against you, if somebody is attacking you, do you not want the police to be on duty to help you? Which means that you're advocating work. You can't get around the fact that work must go on. So Christ said that you're a hypocrite if you interpret it that way. The seventh day has nothing to do with your physical job. It has nothing to do with that. The seventh day has to do with your faith being healed. Being healed is accepting God, for God is the healing of the nations. So when it says remember the seventh day, it is saying for us to remember God, to accept God. That is the seventh day. Emperor Haile Selassie the first. So let his name be praised, for he is the Almighty. And on November the 2nd, 1930, he was crowned King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And that is the seventh day. Blessed be Jah, Rastafari, Emperor Haile Selassie the first.